Hey guys, welcome back. We are here with another trip recap for you, a recent 2 day.
Yeah, we just got back from this 2-day trip, and it was epic fishing. Daytime bite, nighttime bite, sundowner. We had some of all of it.
Yeah, we're going to be starting off with the night bite right here, and you can already see three tuna on the deck, so looks like it was a good night.
Yeah, they were chewing a little bit. The conditions weren't exactly the best. We had a little bit of wind, a little bit of swell. Guys had to use their heavier knife jigs for the most part, like the 500 grams to get down there.
And these fish weren't like 100 pounders, but looks like you had a lot of quantity for sure.
Yeah, good sized schools, really big schools, and mixed grade. Some of the fish were like 25, 30 pounds. Some of the fish were 40, 50 pounds. We had fish up to 80. I think we had one standout that was triple digit fish.
Nice. And it's kind of funny because sometimes fighting the smaller fish actually can be a little bit harder. You'll see in the video a lot of these fish get up to gaff and just take off immediately, or they're super squirrely on the gaff and fighting really hard, full of energy still.
Yeah, what happens a lot is people get them up to the boat so fast that the fish is still green, still hot, and when it gets up to being gaffed, it sees the gaff and it takes off. Sometimes they go sideways really fast and they wrap other people. So, like you said, they get squirrely, and this is a little bit more difficult than the big fish that kind of just get lazy at the end.
And it's really important to remember to follow your fish, especially with these smaller ones when, a lot of your tendency is just to kind of muscle it over or to stay in the same spot and, kind of crank it up to you. It's just as important to follow. It's even more important, I think, to follow the small fish.
Definitely. People think that just because it's a smaller fish, they can control it more and try to dictate where the fish is going to go. And that's when you see a lot of saw-offs and a lot of tangles where fish are lost. So just because a fish is smaller doesn't mean you get to, have cement feet and fight in one place. You definitely still have to follow your fish and move your feet.
And Johnny Cat's fighting a little bit of a bigger fish right now, and he's doing a good job of just kind of angling the rod to where it needs to go. He's not necessarily moving his feet or moving his entire body, but when you're in the corner like that, totally makes sense. Kind of move the eyes where you need it to go, just to steer the fish a little bit when it's super shallow like that, and pretty much at gaff.
The only problem Johnny had here is he kept on giving the head back to the fish right before they could gaff it. He kept dropping the rod tip right as they were getting ready to gaff it. But you could see this fish was still super hot even when they did gaff it, and you see those hooks shaking around from that knife jig. So that's something to be aware of as a fish is coming over the rail super hot like that. If there's assist hooks up top, beware of it, stay away because they hurt.
And it looks like, there's pretty much multiple people hooked up in all these videos. So, was the bite pretty consistent?
Absolutely. Every stop we were getting bit at night, and we were hooking 6, 8, 10 fish, depending on the stop. And what was happening is we were getting short strikes on the fish. So we'd get on a school, we'd hook that handful, 6, 8, 10 fish, and the school would continue through us. We'd get our fish in, and then we would relocate that same school and get on another stop with them.
Now, something I want to talk about here is rod length, just because, like you said, you saw Johnny Cat really putting his rod tip down. You're really seeing this guy kind of muscle it a little bit, not using the rail, especially with smaller fish. You can kind of have the muscle to do that. And we talked about a little bit on our rod comparison video, but I know that we're trending towards these longer rods now for people to have a little bit more clearance, and especially with boats that have really high bows. So, what would you kind of say for people looking at the rod length for the nighttime fishing?
Yeah, like traditional rail rods that most people have are those shorter rods. There's a lot of guys that have like the 6 foot length rods. I think 7 foot to 8 foot is my happy zone for those rods on these boats. Just because if the boat does, or if the fish does try to go underneath the boat, you can get your tip down to the water and pull them out a lot easier. So that extra foot and a half can make all the difference of keeping the fish out of the rudder and out of the prop.
And you don't want something too long, obviously, because as we are seeing right now, people crossing over, crossing under. You want to still have that maneuverability, especially at night when it's really hard to see your lines. But as long as you do a good job, deckhands typically are there when they see lines getting crossed. They'll be at your side, helping coach you which way to go under or over and making sure that it's a smooth transition for everyone, especially when everybody's hooked up, right? It's even more stressful and we get that, but as long as you remain calm, you should be able to figure it out just fine.
For sure. And here's another talking point that we mentioned in our last video. Um, Having one hook on just the end of the knife jig versus having assist hooks. You can see that fish had hooks in the mouth and in the collar. It was a 500-gram knife jig, so a long knife jig. And because it had one in the hook and one in the collar, that fight was much longer for the angler. This guy right here in the corner, he has the same thing going on. And you can see he's having a really hard time gaining on the fish, even though the fish isn't pulling. What's happening is he's fighting against the wind. The wind is making the boat drift, and that fish is essentially hanging out in the same spot, and he's having a really hard time gaining line because it's hooked in the mouth and the collar.
Right, you're not seeing the traditional death circles, is what we call it, right? You're seeing it kind of being towed in, if you will.
Yeah, he's never able to turn the head on the fish. You see right there, like he can't turn it ever. So he's just dragging it against the water, and it's much more difficult, and it really takes a lot longer, and it takes a lot more out of you. So if there's a really good bite, let's say you only get one night bite shot and you want to catch both your bluefin for your limit. That could cost you the amount of time to get back in the water and catch your second fish.
So this is a shot from kind of your sundowner bite, it looks like. What was sort of working?
Yeah, we got on a good school there, a half hour before sundown, something like that. We threw bait on it heavy. Most of the fish were hooked on fly line, and then some of the guys started using sinker rig as it settled in. A few guys even threw out artificial. I think we caught a couple on like the Colt Sniper and the Daiwa Zakana. And this was right before dark, and the fish just reacted and stuck to the boat.
So a lot of guys will ask on the boat, right, when is it time to switch to knife jigs after, kind of the sundowner hits and they're using sinker rigs? What's kind of that sweet spot to switch to completely artificial?
To me, you could use that knife jig all day long if you really wanted to. Fish will bite at. They'll bite at any time. It just depends on the depth that you're hearing the captain call the fish out. If the fish are at 2 to 300 feet during the daytime, there's no reason that they won't bite your knife jig during the day. The problem is you have to drop and wind so much, and it's so tiring that you might not have the energy to do it that night when you're on bigger schools that react faster.
Right, that's always really my response to guys asking me. It's, yeah, you could be using a knife jig right now, and at some points too, it can be appropriate to get down into the zone really fast. If you're stopping on, these small squirrely schools that you only have, maybe a few minutes to hook one, maybe it's appropriate then. But as much as possible, kind of what we talked about with lighter gram knife jigs, whatever you can get away with, right? So if you can get away with a sinker rig during the day or even a fly line during the day, you're going to be able to save your shoulder and really work that steady at night.
Um, and you can see the fish just keep on coming over the rail here for this night bite. The last fish was actually tail snagged. This one conventional hook, so a little bit easier for the angler to get in.
And here we are to talk about the daytime fish.
Daytime fishing was pretty steady throughout the day, actually. I'd say 30 to 40 pound test with your smaller circle hooks was the key to getting a bite. Guys were getting bit on sinker rig during the day as well, 50 to 60 pound test. So there was an assortment of ways to get bit if you worked at it and kept on changing your bait during the day.
Now let's talk about circle hooks for a bit because a lot of guys that are just tuna fishermen have used circle hooks their entire fishing career. Whereas, there's things like J hooks, right, that I would typically use for yellowtail or, other island type fishing.
Most of these, most of the time we recommend the circle hooks for the bluefin. Just because they're so good at inhaling your sardine and chewing you off. They have bigger teeth, and even if you hook a small fish on heavy line and it gets that J hook way in the throat, it'll chew you off. The circle hook's designed where you let it run with your bait for a second. You slowly put it in gear and let it load up instead of like with the J hook, you get that big swing like you're bass fishing kind of to set the hook.
I think that's a really common misconception, and something that a lot of anglers don't understand is that with the circle hook, like you said, you don't have to work really hard to set the hook. Just put it in gear, start winding, and you're going to get it solid, no problem.
Even with J hooks, most of the time you don't have to do that big vicious hook set.
Right.
I think a lot of guys do it just because it's fun and they get to show off and everybody's jealous of the guy that's bit.
Oh, totally. Swing and yell biter. It's a good time.
Yeah, the other big mistake that we'll see oftentimes is people putting their thumb on the spool as they set the hook instead of using the drag as they set the hook. And what happens is you'll break off the fish right away.
Yep, yep. Best rule of thumb, right? Don't put your thumb on the spool.
Yeah, rule of thumb, don't use your thumb.
Yep. Here's another great shot from your sundowner. I mean, especially you can see the good action on this rod here. Doing a great job, really parabolic, and doing a good job of also kicking, right? Kicking up as the fish is coming up.
Yeah, and the angler's doing a good job of controlling his fish. He tried to turn the tip of the rod to follow it there, but you can see Matt kind of guided him. There were multiple fish hanging there, and what he's trying to do is when the fish was circling, just trying to keep them spaced out. So it's always important to listen to your deckhands and your captains that are working with you on deck, so you can, avoid a situation like that when multiple fish are hanging.
Right. They're there to coach you. They're not there to yell at you, even though it might sound like yelling. They want you to land the fish.
Yeah, we want you guys to catch fish just as bad as you do, maybe even worse sometimes. So if we're getting loud, it's just to make sure you hear, because sometimes people get fish blinders on. You forget that there's other people on the boat when you have a fish hanging, and it's understandable because it's such a rush when you get bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right here, you can see we almost broke the rule of thumb. It looks like a few times.
Oh, there again.
Yeah, yeah. His hand gets very close to the reel, and I don't think he actually touches. I think he's just using it to lift with the second hand.
Hmm.
You can see the thumb is super close though. If he were to squeeze on that spool and the fish tried to turn its head, it'd be game over and break off right there.
Right, right. Everybody's technique is their technique, and that's totally fine. We just, again, we want to help you have your best chance of landing a good fish.
Absolutely. You can see right here, this guy's got the rental gear going, and he did a fine job following his fish and working up the rail. Right here up in the bow, you can see you can't really see your fish all that well when you're up in the bow sometimes. So Matt is kind of talking to him, telling him when to lift, when to wind. After he gaffs the fish, he's telling him when to go free spool, and you can see the two of them work together really well as a team there.
Yeah, especially up at the bow, especially at night. I mean, holy cow, it can just become Tangle City up there.
For sure, and you can see this is more of the, sundowner bite here. I believe this is when the sundowner started, so the sun was going down quickly, and this fish stuck with us, and they bit on fly line all the way into the dark, which led us into our night bite.
That's honestly the best is when your daytime bite just bleeds into your nighttime bite. I mean, you don't got to move the boat. You just got to stick with the same school, keep them there, keep hooking them. It's such a good time.
It helps us for sure a lot because you know you're in the right area. Sometimes these fish will disappear, for a couple hours right before dark, and you have to try to relocate the schools. So when you get on a sundowner bite, you know you're in the same area. You just have to relocate a school that's in that area once it gets dark.
Yep, and so it looks like everybody's having a fun time, multiple hookups here, and even this guy, he got his first bluefin, huh?
Time-honored tradition here, eating the tuna's heart for your first bluefin, so congrats to the angler.